Samantha had been working as a night shift nurse at an old private hospital in the city for several months. The hospital was known for its outdated equipment and peculiar design. Long, dark hallways, old wooden doors, and the feeling that something was always just out of reach. Despite the hospital's reputation for being haunted, Samantha never believed in ghosts. Until one night, she encountered something she couldn't explain. It all started around 2 a.m., when she was assigned to work in the basement wing of the hospital. This area had been closed off to the public years ago due to renovations, but it still housed old equipment and storage rooms. She had always heard rumors about this wing, staff who claimed to hear strange noises or see shadows moving when no one was around, but Samantha was practical. She'd written it off as overactive imaginations or the creaks and groans of an old building. On that night, however, something felt different. As she walked down the empty corridor, the lights flickered and dimmed. Her heart began to race, but she pressed on. Then she heard it. A door creaking open behind her. Spinning around, Samantha saw a dim light coming from one of the old rooms. She knew that room had been locked for years. Curious, she approached the door and found it slightly ajar. Pushing it open cautiously, she was met with an overwhelming sense of coldness. The room was filled with dusty old medical supplies, but what struck her was the smell, a putrid, decaying stench. As she stepped further inside, her eyes were drawn to a shadowy figure standing in the far corner of the room. It was an elderly man, slumped over in a chair, his face pale and gaunt. Samantha rushed over, assuming he was a patient who had somehow snuck in. But when she touched his shoulder, he collapsed into dust. Panic flooded her system. She sprinted down the hallway, screaming for help, but when the security guards arrived, the room was locked again. No trace of the elderly man, no dust, just a clean, empty room. Later, when she reported the incident, the hospital administrator revealed a disturbing truth. Decades ago, an elderly patient had been abandoned in that room, forgotten by the staff. He had died alone, and his body was never properly discovered. Samantha had encountered his ghost that night. Lance worked as a night shift technician at a radio station, a job he loved despite the eerie atmosphere that came with working in an old, remote building. The radio station had been operating for decades, long before Lance was hired. Despite the building's age and occasional creaks, it was a job he could count on. But one night, something would happen that would leave him questioning everything he knew about the world. It was nearing 3 a.m. when Lance was alone in the control room, keeping watch over the equipment and preparing for the upcoming broadcast. As he fiddled with the radio dials, adjusting the sound levels, he noticed an unusual static on the airwaves. At first, it seemed like just another glitch, a common occurrence when working with old equipment. But then, the static began to form into a voice, low and distorted. The voice was faint at first, but slowly became clearer. "Lance, you're not alone. Turn around." The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He turned quickly, scanning the room, but saw nothing. His heart raced, but he figured it was just a prank, or perhaps his mind playing tricks in the solitude of the late shift. But the voice continued, now clearer, almost mocking. "I'm still here, Lance. You can't run." The voice repeated his name, growing louder each time. It wasn't static, it was real, coming through the radio. Lance's hands trembled as he frantically searched for the source of the transmission. The radio station was supposed to be off air at this time. Finally, in a panic, he turned off all the equipment, but the voice didn't stop. It came through the speakers, clearer than ever. "I'm still here, just like I was all those years ago. You'll never be able to leave." Lance rushed out of the control room and straight to the building's front office, where he found the night security guard. But when he told him about the radio transmissions, the guard just stared at him, pale. "You weren't supposed to hear that," he said softly. "The old station manager died in that room 5 years ago, and his ghost has been trying to communicate ever since. We've had a few incidents like this, but no one has lasted long enough to hear it." Lance never worked another night shift at that station. Megan worked as a customer service representative at a large call center covering the night shifts. The work was monotonous, but the pay was decent, and the night shifts were the only ones she could get. Her shifts usually involved answering questions about utility bills or assisting customers with issues, But one night, everything changed. It was a cold night, and Megan was the only one in her section. The call center was eerily silent at this hour, and the rest of the building was practically deserted. As she answered another incoming call, her screen blinked, showing an unfamiliar phone number. This wasn't unusual, as customers from all over would call in, but something about the number felt off. When she answered, there was silence on the other end for a moment, then a raspy voice, almost as if someone was whispering from a distance. "Megan, do you remember me?" Her heart skipped a beat. The voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Who is this?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. The voice responded, "It's me, Dad. I miss you." Megan froze. Her father had passed away 2 years ago in a tragic accident. There was no way he could be on the other line. Panicking, she asked again, "Who is this?" The voice continued, "I'm still here, just like I was when you last saw me. You don't have to be afraid." Megan's hands were shaking as she ended the call, but the strange voice called again and again and again. Each time, it was the same voice, the same cryptic message. She couldn't understand it. Was it a prank? A glitch in the system? Or was it something more? The next morning, Megan spoke to her supervisor about the strange incident. The supervisor's face went pale. "You aren't the first one to experience that call. It's been happening for years. People who've lost loved ones sometimes get calls like that. No one knows how it works, but it's real." Megan could never shake the feeling that her father had tried to reach out to her that night. Night shifts can be strange, but these real-life stories show us that sometimes the darkness hides things we can't explain. If you've experienced something you can't explain during a night shift, leave your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell for more eerie tales. We'll be back with more stories that will make you question what lurks in the shadows.